Today's story is Welcome to the End by Ray Beaman. Welcome to the end. How appropriate. It was a cool morning. The air was crisp and the freshly fallen rain cleansed the wildness all around me. Mother Nature seemed eager to impress. Her beauty extended as far as the eye could see in every conceivable direction. Shades of green and brown complemented each other nicely as the forest seemed to beckon us to move deeper within, promising to reward our trip with further examples of perfection. A memorable weekend was promised, and so far, the world before us seemed committed to providing us with that very thing. Why do they call it the end? Look around, Dante. There's nobody for miles. There are no cars, no shops, no police, no rules, hell, no civilization at all. This is figuratively the end of the world. It's just us and the forest. Talk about getting away from it all. I looked around. She's right. After everything that had happened, I was hesitant of taking the trip. Lily, however, had done a very good job of selling it, although, to be fair, she always had a way of influencing me. I do feel better being out here. I guess spending most of your time in one room can really take it out of you. Lily laughed. Oh, it will. The walk to the campsite took at least 2 hours. Matthew and his brother Lucas were on fine form today, their endearing yet abrasive personalities booming loud amongst the silence of the trees and the foliage. "You've got the weed?" Matthew asked. "I've got my weed." Matthew's girlfriend looked unimpressed. "Do you really think that you can survive a weekend with these two?" Lily asked. Sam sighed. "You learn to live with it. It's kind of like having IBS." I laughed along with the group. It had been so long since I had laughed. You can never really prepare for how weighty the past can be. All of it can encumber. Life had slowly dragged me down. It had clawed at me. It pulled at me, and I had let it. After all, there's nothing like loss to truly remind you of what you once had. Finally, the clearing came into view. "Paradise awaits, my children." Lucas laughed. "Now how about we appreciate the trees and get high?" "Matt, tell him, please," Sam pleaded. "Can we at least set up camp before you two get stoned?" Matthew shook his head. "She's right, you dope. First work, and then play." It was not long before our tents were up, and we found ourselves sitting around the unlit fire. "So," Lucas began, "have you guys heard about what's up here?" "What are you going on about?" Lily asked. "The Wendigo." "Oh, Lucas, really?" Lucas nodded. "No, really, 100%. These hills, this place that we now call home, they belong to the Wendigo. Surely you must have heard the legends. People get lost up here. They're never heard from again. You know, they run out of food and have to resort to cannibalism. It's a well-known fact, guys. The biggest taboo unleashes the spirit of the Wendigo." Matthew smirked. "If they are never heard from again, then who is responsible for the legends, you idiot?" "Semantics, young Matthew. Semantics." Sam shivered. "Make him stop, Matt, please." Matthew shook his head. "Semantics, huh? Where did you learn that word? And who are you calling young? I'm 30 seconds older than you." Lucas laughed. "But I'm 30 seconds smarter. Besides, I can prove it." The group fell silent. "What do you mean?" I asked. "A cave, Dante. I know where the Wendigo sleeps during the day. There is a cave not too far from here. I can show you, if you like." Before I could answer, Matthew had already taken the bait. "Okay, show us this cave then." "Matt, no." Matthew turned to Sam. Baby, it's okay. Let's just indulge this idiot for a bit. It'll be fun. Matthew rose to his feet and Sam reluctantly followed. It's going to be life-changing. Let's make some memories. Lily laughed. Are we really doing this, Dante? I guess so. By the time we neared the cave, the sun was already setting. Dim streaks of light barely permeated the canopy above us, the elusive rays struggling to guide our way as we moved forward. The forest around us seemed more silent than it had upon our arrival. The peaceful yet unsettling sound of nothingness seemed to only grow louder as the opening in the rock face came into view. See? Our group paused, just outside of the entrance. It's a cave, Matthew said, and not a very impressive one at that. Lily moved towards the entrance. The outside is, at least, she said. Are these scratch marks in the rock? My eyes paused on Lily for a second. If only. Scratch marks? Really, Lily? Have you honestly been taken in by my brother? Any animal could have done that. Into stone, Matt? Into stone, into rock, into who cares? Scratches out here proves nothing. Lucas stepped towards the entrance. Well, why don't we see then? It's what we're all here for. Besides, Lily is a nurse. She could fix us up if anything goes wrong. I don't think anything could fix you, Lucas. For a second, my heart skipped, even though I was unsure of exactly why. I'd never been a believer of the supernatural, of cryptids, ghosts, or any other phenomena yet to be explained, but my body reacted regardless. The darkness from the cave seeped from the entrance and infected the surrounding wall, covering it in its sickly presence. This does not feel right. The thought was there, growing large from within me, and from the void before me. I could feel the abyss calling. The sensation was odd, but the sensation was familiar. Whatever waited in the shadows, whatever that feeling meant, I just knew that this did not feel right. No, I'm going back, I said. It's been a long day already, and I do not fancy breaking my leg in the dark. Lucas shook his head. Coward. Lily had already turned back to me, the concern on her face crisp and sincere. She cares. Okay, Dante, I'll come with you. I smiled inside. Oh, come on. Matthew, are you two going back to the chicken farm as well? Matthew smirked. No, younger brother, I would not pass up the chance to prove you wrong. The trio disappeared into the cave, and Lily and I made our way back to the campsite. Hours passed, and night fell across the sky. Despite the nocturnal turn, the usual creatures and bugs one would assume to inhabit the forest could not be heard. The wind blew eerily through the trees, but little else cut through the silence of our camp. When the three had not returned by nightfall, we started to panic. Finally, after the longest time, Lucas and Matthew finally stumbled from the tree line and out into the clearing. Is she back yet? Who? Sam, Matthew panted. We got separated in the cave. Is she back yet? I shook my head. Panic. The unsettling feeling was strong, and it quickly spread amongst us. We decided to head back to the cave in search of Sam. However, after a few minutes of wandering through the trees, we somehow found our way back to the camp. We tried once. We tried twice. We must have tried at least 10 times, but each attempt ended the same way as it began, right back at the clearing. Defeated, we had little choice but to turn in for the night and wait until morning. The rain fell against my tent as I tried to sleep. Time swirled with the wind as I desperately sought slumber, but no matter how hard I tried, it never came. There were too many thoughts, too many worries. Sam had not yet returned, and we had no hope of finding her in the dead of the night. Anything could have happened. She could be injured. She could need help. I feel so helpless. I rolled over in my sleeping bag and sighed. It was in that moment that I heard it. Through the rain and through the wind, it was there and it could not be explained away. Snap. The sound of someone approaching could be heard. Snap. The steps grew closer. Snap. Whoever it was, they were outside of my tent. Through the thin barrier of my shelter, I could just about make out the silhouette of a person. No, not a person. This is something else. The hunch was not human. Its stature and the way that it held its weight, it was odd and obviously misplaced. It raised its arms, its reach unnaturally long, longer than that of any man. My heart strained as the creature stopped less than a meter from me, waiting. I held my breath. There was no thought, no call to action. My brain abandoned me as I struggled to contain the air within my lungs. The creature stretched its neck upwards and held it there for a moment. Its breath rugged and heavy, and then, after a few more seconds, its gaze slowly turned in my direction. My chest was burning. It felt as if I had been holding my breath for an eternity. My body strained as it wanted for air, but I fought the instinct to exhale. Gradually, the creature began to move its head forward towards my tent. The moment of death. I always thought that you were meant to see your life flash before your eyes. Nothing of the sort happened, though, as the thing outside pressed its face into the material. There was no grand revelation, no memories of better times, and no snapshots of events past. Only the absolute fear. A feeling like none I had ever experienced. The material of the tent moved slowly towards me as its face made contact. Slowly it edged closer, inch by inch, second by second, until whatever lurked outside had its mouth and eyes no more than a centimeter from mine. Do not breathe. Even through the fear, I could still make out the outline of its features as it forced them against my shelter. Its cheeks were drawn in, long and thin. The shape of its skull was elongated, stretched, and gaunt. A smell of rotten meat infected my senses. It opened its mouth wide against the tent, the nylon disapproving in a loud and audible tear. I felt a tear fall from my eye as I gazed into my own demise. Seconds, minutes, time was irrelevant. All I knew was that if I relented to the pain, if I gave in and sucked the air which I so desperately craved, then that breath would be my last. There was only one thought. It repeated, and it was the only thing that mattered. Do not breathe. The creature exhaled in an animalistic hiss, the stinking warmth of its breath managing to find its way into the tent and into my nostrils. Again, my body fought for oxygen, and again, I fought back. One wrong move, and it's over. Suddenly, it inhaled deeply, almost as if savoring the rancid stink of my fear. It was then that I realized without doubt that whatever waited for me mere centimeters from my face, whatever it was, it knew I was here. Oh my God! The scream was high-pitched, and it sliced through the moment. The creature abruptly retracted its head, turned briefly toward the source of the noise, and then disappeared instantly from sight. It's Sam! My God! It's Sam! Look at her! Just look at her! I was on my feet and out of the tent in a second. Lily was standing near the dying fire, the embers gently lighting her face as they struggled at life. They captured her beauty wonderfully. They captured her terror perfectly. Dante, oh my God, Dante. She was gasping as she pointed off into the distance behind me. Oh, she's been cut. She's been torn apart. Lucas and Matthew had heard the screaming. They appeared from their tents and quickly made their way over to Lily. Matthew saw it next, and he instinctively reacted. Sam? Sam? He tried to push his way forward, but Lucas held him back. I did not want to look. I knew that whatever was there, I would never be able to unsee it. I just knew. It would be one of those moments that would never leave me. It would burn into me. It would haunt me. I did not want to look, but I turned anyway. My wife's screams bled into nothing but silence as my eyes registered the horror before me. Pieces, chunks, fragments, and bone. Barely any features. Little left of a person, nothing but scraps and blood. The sight was visceral. The sight was never-ending. Tears in the flesh, gashes and slashes gaped wide, and a darkened liquid oozed from every hole. I felt a piece of my soul shatter as my lids refused to close. You will never be the same. But that was just the beginning. The horror was far from over. The night refused to give way to the day, instead opting to seal us within the blackness which had grown firmly throughout our reality. Hours passed and we lit a fire. Time passed and the darkness remained. 1 hour turned to 2, and 2 turned to 8. Before long, we realized that we had been waiting for the morning for almost the duration of an entire day, and yet the darkness persisted. So, another hour passed, and we lit another fire. We should bury her. I was sure that Lily would have shed a tear if she had not already been crying for most of the night. She deserves that. So, we buried her. The process was horrific. We tore at the mud as our fingers strained. We corrupted our nails and bloodied our limbs, but we carried on. There was little else that could be done after all. The forest had taken us for its own, refusing to release us from its never-ending grip. Once the hole was deep enough, Lucas and I did what we could to move the remains of Sam into the hole. As we did, her limbs came apart, and any lingering ounce of her humanity seeped from her stumps, collecting in a thick red pool below her remains. And we all stood in the darkness, said a few words, and then we covered her with dirt. Another hour passed, and we lit another fire. Time seemed to slow as it sped on. We tried once more to find our way out of the forest, but again, we only found ourselves back at our camp. The eternal night stood firm, never ceasing as 1 day turned to 2 and then 2 to 4. It was then that we realized that things were much worse than we had thought. We had only planned to be in the forest for the weekend, and so we had only packed what we deemed essential for that time. We had beer, we had water, we had food, but not enough. Our supplies quickly emptied, and before long, we had nothing. With the darkness still all around us, and nothing but the time as it continued to move forward for company, we knew that before long we would be in serious trouble. Lucas lit another fire and demanded our attention. Look, we're going to starve if we don't do something. This night, it cannot go on forever, so I'm thinking we just need to hold out for a little bit longer. We just need to survive. I can only think of one way of doing that. I knew the words which were about to come. I wished that I didn't, but I knew what he was about to say. Lily shook her head. Yes, Lily, Lucas said. You know it has to be done. We need to dig up Sam. Lucas, there must be some other way. Really, Lily? In case you've not been paying attention, we're in a very bad way here. So please, if you can think of any other way, please just tell me, because trust me, this is not a decision that I take lightly. She would want us to survive, and she would want you to survive, Lily. You know Sam. You know that she would want that for you. Lily began to cry. He's right, Matthew said, rising to his feet. She would want us to. My mind buzzed as the realization of what was being proposed slowly sank in. You two cannot be serious, I asked. Are you really suggesting that we just eat Sam? Really? And what do we do after? Do we just sit around until we need to eat again? In case you've noticed, it's been almost a week, and we are stuck here. What next then? What comes after? Lucas thought for a second before answering. Next, we draw straws. Everything was wrong. The forest around moved noticeably as Lucas and Matthew rose to their feet. The wind blew heavily. Its fierce voice shook the trees and rattled our lives as the pair made their way towards the freshly dug grave. The forest was speaking. The forest was screaming and the trees laughed manically as Lucas and Matthew began to claw at the mud beneath them. I cannot be a part of this. With each scoop, I knew that a terrible choice was coming. Each handful of mud moved me closer to a life-changing moment, one which I would either have to live with or eventually die with. I wished for more time, but hunger appeared to be an effective motivator, and before my brain had even come to terms with the turn of events, Lucas was already pulling what remained of Sam from the hole. I can't, I whispered. I won't. I knew then that I had to leave. As Lily cried and Matthew and Lucas feasted, I just knew that I had to leave. With each loud bite, and with each noise of teeth grinding against rotten flesh, I just knew that I had to leave. I knew that I had made myself the odd one out. My refusal to take part in the sin had made their choice easier, and it would not be long before desperation took hold. Eventually, there would be no need for straws. I waited for them to sleep. Thankfully, it did not take long. Carefully, I tiptoed through the cool night air and over towards Lily's tent. Lily, wake up. We have to leave. After a few seconds of silence, I heard her stir. She unzipped the entrance to her tent and poked her head out. Dante, what are you doing here? Lily, we have to go. This is going to get really bad. They will turn on us, Lily. We need to leave. I watched on as her beautiful eyes moved. I knew that she understood what I was suggesting. We both knew that we were going to die. The only choice that we really had left was how. Okay, let's go. But it was too late. A scream came at us from the other side of the clearing. Where are you two off to at this hour? Lucas yelled. Matthew, wake up. Dinner is running out the front door. There was no thought and no plan. My brain was vacant as I took Lily by the hand and forcibly guided her from the tent and towards the trees. Matthew, wake up. We have work to do. The clearing disappeared behind us as we ran. I could hear the voices behind us, calling for us, searching for us, but I kept us moving forward. We ran and we ran through the tall trees with no clear path and no real hope, but we continued on regardless. Lily protested for me to slow, but I knew that we couldn't. If we did even for a second, then it would all be over. My face scratched and cut against branches, my chest burned and my blood pumped acid, but we continued. Slowly, the shouting from the camp grew quieter, and after the longest time running, Somehow, I found myself stood before the opening to the cave. Lily, I turned back to her, but she was gone. My Lily. I collapsed to the ground as the realization took hold. I had her hand. I felt her hand the entire time. Somehow, I had lost her. Back in the darkness, lost within the trees and trapped within the bleak blackness of the unforgiving forest, somehow I had failed her. The sorrow burst through as the last ounce of my resolve dissolved. I cried. I was reduced to nothing more than a mess of a person lying amongst the dirt. Everything had gone wrong. Everything was hell. I had suffered so much throughout my life, and now it seemed that it was not enough. There was no God, and there was no salvation. I knew that I was destined to suffer for an eternity. Suddenly, through my pity, something happened. The cave. From within, I could feel it. It was calling me, welcoming me. Without thinking, I rose to my feet. The darkness was still there, infecting the surrounding wall, covering it in its sickly presence. The unsettling feeling was still there, and my reluctance to enter was still there, but my feet moved towards it anyways. Like a siren, it called to me, its plea rising in intensity as my legs carried me forward. For a second, I felt as if I could even hear it whisper my name. With no real choice, I moved into the thick veil of blackness covering the entrance and made my way inside. The fresh air of the forest disappeared, and the smell of moisture and damp hung heavily around. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I could see that the narrow passage extended before me at least 20 meters. At the end of the tunnel, there seemed to be a light. Maybe a way out? I moved closer to the light, step by step, and as I did, more of what awaited me at the end came into focus. As I closed the distance and neared the end, an object could finally be seen. A typewriter. The red, old-looking typewriter sat on a table, a ray of light illuminating it perfectly within the shadows. It looked clean, it looked maintained, and it looked out of place amongst the claustrophobic interior of the cave. A fresh piece of paper had been left within the typewriter. Whatever was on the page seemed to be what had called to me. It had somehow spoken to me within this cave, its voice loud as it carried against the walls on its path back out into the forest. It had been calling this entire time. Only now did I realize that the message had to be read. With a shaking hand, I retrieved the paper and read, "I will try my best to ensure that this time is not like the last. I was caught cheating the system before, and the heavens will attest to the punishment that I had endured for that transgression. Although, you will know this better than most. You have my word. That will not happen again. This time I have been meticulous, and this time I have been cautious. I cannot give you everything, for that is not permitted. The clues are there for you to find, and I know that you will find them. You must. You have already seen some, and their meaning is there for you to discern. For it is only once the story is complete and the chapters have been laid bare that the understanding can be achieved. And it is with that understanding that the shackles can be cast aside. Rest assured, I know you and you know me, so with that fact established, I know that we will succeed. Read my words and watch for the next. D.A. I read the words once, and then I read them again. As my eyes settled on the title at the top of the page, I knew that my torment was far from over. The 4 words were clear, even though their meaning escaped me. As I read them, somehow, I knew of their importance. Welcome to the end. So that was once again Welcome to the End by Ray Beaman, aka A Right Struggle. This man has provided me some amazing stories for this channel, and I adore his writing, absolutely. I hope you guys enjoy it too. He has written some he has written some fantastic stories, what I'm trying to say. Go check him out on all of his platforms, please. Show him some love, follow him on the social medias, all that stuff. That said, if you did enjoy this and want more like this, please do consider following this channel as well on the social media platforms or through the subscription button and the bell icon. You can also do the thing where you hit that join button or join Patreon, all that stuff. Get the early access to my content. Always appreciated. Always optional as well. My brain's a bit disjointed, as you can clearly tell. My sentences are not... I just hit my microphone. My sentences are not flowing together as well as they should be. But I'm trying. So hit that thumbs up button and leave me a comment letting me know how crazy I sound in this outro. All that said, friends, I love you and I hope you have a beautiful day. I will, see you on the next video. But until then, sleep well.